First I had heard about El Salvador was probably from this local surf shop in Jupiter, Resin Craft. And they had traveled Central America a few times, and we heard about El Salvador and La Libertad, the point. So we wanted to go surf that. That was the second trip I had done to Central America.
I got invited on the El Salvador trip through my friend Wayne Cornelius. His friend Bob Washam had a roommate in college that had a connection, an El Salvadorian guy. And his grandmother had a place in San Diego where we ended up staying. And the other guys in the group, Royce Powell and Paul and John Hass. The group of those guys grew up in Palm Beach Gardens. I grew up in Jupiter, but I used to see Wayne out surfing in Jupiter.
When I was staying in the dorms in Melbourne at Florida Institute of Technology, there were two guys on our floor that I started to meet. They were from El Salvador. I probably didn't even know, at that time I didn't even know where El Salvador was, but they told me that the waves were good there, and one of them, Ernesto Velasco, said, why don't you come down to El Salvador this summer?
I flipped open a surfer magazine and saw a picture of either Eric Penny or one of his friends sitting on the side of a guardrail in Zunzal, El Salvador. And at that time, as you would imagine, Florida has notorious flat spells in the summer. So to be able to see those kind of waves and think and imagine to myself that I could be surfing a wave like Zunzal, beautiful background blue water and big wave, was something beyond I could ever imagine. So I began to think, how am I going to earn the money and also convince my dad, who was a very strict man, so that I could go on a summer trip.
I had received a surfboard from Claude Codgen. It was a surfboard he shaped and rode for a number of years, and he let me use it on my trip. But on the way home, I stopped at Shag Surf Shop, and I was looking at a couple boards, and I was thinking about buying a 6'2" or 6'4", and this older fellow came out behind the counter, and it was Dick Cattree, and he says, "Oh no, you need it like 7'4". So I ended up picking a 6'8" pintail.
I was just beginning to build surfboards at that time, and the local surf shop suggested we take some longer boards, so I built a 7'6", kind of a stinger swallowtail to take down there. You know, it was a good paddling board, but pretty drawn out surfing board.
I had to think about surfing in the same chance that I really was not that good of a surfer. So I asked Wayne C. to make me a surfboard, and I recall this was really a big investment for me. So the most important thing that we did, we began to watch a lot of surf movies, especially Hawaiian movies, and I saw a surfboard that Reno Abarrera was surfing called a swallowtail. And I was convinced that I could picture myself riding this 6-8 foot swallowtail that Wayne made for me, emerald green, made in his little shack out behind his house, and that was going to be my surfboard of choice, surfing El Salvador.
At the time of the trip, I was a college student. I didn't have very much money. Wayne Cornelius had made me a Florida fish, a 6-foot twin fin, and that was really the only board I had. I didn't have any money to buy a new board and also go on the trip, so I decided to take the twin fin. It turned out not to be the best board for those type of waves, but I did get out there and try to surf the points.
We flew into San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador, and it was a really neat trip because we overflew beautiful turquoise waters of Belize. And upon arriving, the capital looked really modern. We overnighted there with our Salvadorian friends that enabled us, gave us a place to stay. We stayed at their home, and then we traveled out with them to San Diego, which took about an hour. And the countryside was just spectacular. Central America is so beautiful.
Our friend Neto Velasco and his family, who had asked us to come and spend the night with them in San Salvador. They were a very wealthy family. They lived in the outskirts of town, beautiful home, and they were giving us their beach house to surf at no charge.
Ernesto, his nickname was Neto. His family welcomed us to El Salvador. We went to his house. I remember his father first thing giving us beers.
And of course, in my religious upbringing, that was somewhat taboo, but I was glad to drink the beer with him.
There was a couple of women who brought up burritos for us, and we ate and drank beers and talked to them.
He mentioned that he was going to drive us down to San Diego the next day and make sure we were all okay, and then we'd be on our own.
We felt very safe and very like we were in a good place at that time.
We did have to go and get ourselves ready, and one of the things we found is getting through the Spanish experience of going, for example, to the bank. I recall going to the bank, getting my money exchanged, and having to walk around sandbags with soldiers holding guns as we walked into the lobby of the bank.
I felt very comfortable when we got there to El Salvador, being with my friend and his family, and also we felt pretty comfortable at his beach house because the beach house was in a upper middle class neighborhood. It was pretty quiet during the weekdays, but on the weekends more people came down there, and there was also a caretaker who they didn't speak any English. We spoke very little Spanish, but there was caretakers at the place where we were staying.
Once you get to the beach in El Salvador, life begins to really slow down. San Diego was just a quiet little strip of sand road with a few beach houses. No one was there during the week because it was vacation homes for the wealthy from San Salvador. We were so excited to be able to go surfing, and we were looking at the beach break there at San Diego and going, oh my gosh, this is just like home, but the waves are really big and closing out. So we began to start to talk. We put on some Led Zeppelin. We started to mellow out a little bit, but we were really getting stoked we could go the next day. And the first thing you realize is summoning transportation is not the best experience. For example, I'm recalling our first trip to Punta Roca was in the back of a taxi. So you can imagine a little Toyota Corolla pulling up and seeing all these surfboards, and the guy's trying to jam all these big surfboards in the back of his trunk. That's where we got all these original pressure dings because of the fact that he was so eager to make his cab fare, and he insisted on us all fitting in his cab along with our surfboard. So it was a mess. It was an absolute mess. People were hot and we're thinking, oh, is this the right trip? We did have a good time. After that, it was the autobus every day.
We'd have to take a bus to actually go and surf because the place we stayed just had a beach break, and wasn't really that good for surfing. So we'd take the bus in every day into the point, La Libertad, and sometimes take the bus down to Zunzal and surf that point there also.
Every morning we'd wake up and we'd anticipate the time of arrival of the bus that would take us into La Libertad, where that fabulous point break was. The bus would arrive and there was so many people trying to help us load the boards, and they're pulling them out of our hands, and we're, they're fragile, and then they'd tie them down with ropes. And the first day, there was a couple pressure dings.
They would make room for us with the chickens on top of the bus for our boards, and the bus driver would sit us up front, and off we'd go to the point.
The two breaks that we surfed was La Libertad, the town, as the break Rocky Point, or Punta Roca. And that is one of the world's class right-hand point breaks. It breaks for 200 yards perfection. You can get tubed 3 times on the wave. Very challenging, and there was a few rocks in the water that would actually come out of the water while you were taking off if you were close to them, and you had to go around them or over them. And then the other break was Zunzal. It was a perfect right-hand break as well. It was soft. It wasn't critical. You can never get tubed on it.
We stayed in San Diego that had a beach break, but it was just kind of a closed out break. So we wanted to surf point surf. So that's why we traveled every day into La Libertad. It was a great right-hand point. Not too crowded except for on the weekends. A lot of the locals would pour in and surf it on the weekends, but during the week, maybe 5 to 6, maybe a dozen surfers in the water. We also would surf the other point, Zunzal, and we had surfed that point mostly by ourselves. I don't know if we ever caught it at its best, but we surfed four or five times. I remember surfing Zunzal, and it was kind of a big, mushy right-hand point. And La Libertad was more of a true point wave with a long right.
So after a few days of surfing, I got over my fear. I actually caught a couple stiff rights. Being a goofy foot, I obviously had great disdain for Punta Roca. I did enjoy surfing with Wayne because Wayne and Bob and Doug, they all seemed to have a much better sense of surfing than myself. John, my brother John, was actually a little bit more terrified than me, but he got over it and he was surfing. I think having a brother helped me. And really the point of surfing was more about the camaraderie to me at the time, not the athletic skills. We did get a chance to go to Zunzal, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is my kind of wave because they even have lefts here. So we see Zunzal, and you've got to imagine, I'm picturing Zunzal like I saw in the picture of Eric Penny sitting on the beach. I roll up, and it's this big bay with a giant wave rolling into it. It's the most picturesque thing I've ever seen, being a kid from Florida. It was absolutely gorgeous. I kept imagining I was at Waimea Bay. And so we paddle out, and as stories go, we've either saw tiger sharks, or we just had an innate fear of the open ocean with a big wave coming at us, and had a lot of fun. It was a big mushy rolling wave, kind of like Monster Hole, and we had a blast.
I had probably just started surfing a couple years before, so much of the surfing there was challenging for me. But I did get out there and I surfed the main point in La Libertad and also Zunzal.
The people in the water was mainly groups of surfers from New Jersey, even Texas, California.
There weren't very many locals right there in La Libertad. I think Bob Rotherham usually had some people staying in his place, so there were maybe some Californians, but on the weekends you had some of the locals who lived in San Salvador who would drive out and surf Saturday and Sunday. So Saturday and Sunday were kind of crowded, so we would generally, I remember going and surfing Zunzal on those days. But Royce Powell, who was filming most of our surfing, one day said, "You got to see a guy who just came to the point today," and it ended up being Eric Penny, and he would set higher on the point and get the best waves just all the time. He was the best surfer in the water.
Normally would be about 20 people in the water. The water was very dark, it was black, and every day we would have 2 or 3 sharks that would come right through the lineup, and we'd all be sitting there with our legs in the water. And the very first day I was there, when they came through, I was the only one that was screaming shark, and everybody's looking at me like, "What's wrong with you? This is they do this every day, they don't bother you."
Our experiences were vast, and it was somewhat of a culture shock, especially having to do with the sanitary conditions as well as the local environment there.
The local people were very friendly. We interacted with quite a few of them, between Bob Rotherham, who was a expatriate that had a restaurant hotel there on the beach. We went into town and did all our shopping in the open market that was there, and then we also had some shirts made at a local tailor, which was pretty good. We didn't know the guy was a real fine tailor.
This tailor just couldn't understand, why would you want to make a shirt out of a bread sack?
Really, the most important thing was walking through a little town strung along the side of a cliff, with a restaurant festooned at the end, Bob Rotherham's Punta Roca restaurant, trying to get a meal of rice and beans after a surf session.
Rotherham, he was an interesting guy. Came from Miami, Florida, and had these really, really big spear-like boards. Well, there's a reason. Bob Rotherham could ride the point at 15 foot with so much confidence, and he really had that breakdown.
One day we decided to go out in front of the beach house, which was a beach break, similar to waves that we have here when the waves are big, but it was a big closeout. But we went out there and tried to catch some waves. One wave toward the end of this, and this was toward the end of the trip, I took a wave and the lip hit me and I slammed onto the water. Somehow I got to a doctor who said I had punctured my eardrum. That kind of ended my trip, and that was probably maybe 3 or 4 days to the end of the trip.
I decided I was going to take a nice walk, and I started walking south of San Diego just to experience the long beach, and I got about 2 miles south of San Diego and I was dying of thirst. When I got to a little home, they had a cistern there. My brother John was walking with me, goes, "Man, do not drink any of that water." And I'm like, "John, I have to drink some water." So I drank some water out of the cistern, not really thinking about what I was gonna get. I was sick, and my brother could not help me. It was a Friday night, I recall, and I was in dire need of some help. So I got John to get me up, and we summoned a taxi. We got a way to go. We had to go to a town called Santa Tecla, where the nearest hospital was. The doctor in town could not do anything for me. And as they get me up to about the first 20 miles, we got stopped at a roadblock. And the soldiers that stopped us, they were paramilitary type guys. They came to the car. I was delirium. And John was trying to explain to me, he didn't know any Spanish, that I was deathly ill. We needed to get to the hospital. They thought I was drunk. So they stuck a gun to my head. And they said, "We need him to get out of the car." And John said, "He is he's dying.
My favorite times on the trip was the full moon swells. It was 15-foot faces, and it just dropping in and feeling comfortable, making bottom turns, cutting back to towards the breaking part of the wave, and riding the wave with confidence. That to me was the highlight of the trip, where you actually felt like you were surfing.
There were a lot of firsts for me in that trip. One was, I can remember the first day we paddled out, we had made these homemade surf leashes. Surf leashes hadn't been around but just a couple years at that point in time. And so we made what we thought were strong leashes. And I remember, I think 2 or 3 of us broke our leash on the first wipeout we took and had to go swim for our boards up on the rocks. So it was a learning curve, a learning experience to really feel the power of the surf, being from Florida.
We had these surfboards that had never been into waves any bigger than about 3 feet. We had surf leashes that we had designed on our own, which was basically surgical tubing with a nylon string through the middle and a cloth strap for your foot that you tied onto the back of the board. And then you had a 5 to 6 foot swell, which you took off of basically in front of a big rock. So my first wave was shivering, freaking out, and falling off my board, and my surf leash stretching about 30 feet. And then coming slinging back to me at about 100 miles an hour. So my board was dinged, the leash broke. I go in and I meet this guy on the beach named Mushroom Man. And Mushroom Man said, "Stop being such a pussy. You get out there and I'll show you how to catch these waves."
El Salvador had a feeling of uneasiness, where you would see 14-year-old boys in a green Army uniform holding an automatic weapon in many places.
It was really tough going through customs. I remember the first time they really tore our bags apart, took our backpacks apart.
One of the bigger interests to me was the year before, the guys had told me when they were leaving Miami, where we flew out of Miami, is they all had to cut their hair before they got into Costa Rica. Well, I didn't have really long hair, but my hair was around my shoulders, and I kept thinking, were they gonna make me cut my hair? We finally got into San Salvador, and as you get off, the sights, the smells, the sounds, everything there is so immense and so ordinary. And then you see the soldiers standing there with their semi-automatic weapons waiting for you to come through customs. So I'm thinking, I ain't got no drugs on me. I'm okay. I want to have a lot of fun in this country. But you begin to sense the military presence the minute you walk off the plane.
It was starting to get restless with civil war on the brink of breaking out. But I think we were kind of oblivious to that, other than there was a lot of armed military personnel around. I had a little Super 8 movie camera that I had bought when I started traveling. It was an old GAF Super 8 millimeter. I think it had like an 8:1 zoom on it. So we thought that was really getting in on the size of the waves and the people, but it was really a joke, as I remember.